Had a very busy day by the sounds of it.
Have we started?
Yeah, we've started.
Okay, excellent. Very authentic. I've had a full-on day. I have, but I'm very grateful. I can stop holding the
Yeah, you don't need to hold
Yeah.
that anymore. It's just
Okay.
when you move it.
Okay. Full-on day, but I'm really happy to be here. Finally.
I'm happy to have you here.
Yeah.
So, for those that can't tell who this is, we have none other than Pauline Hanson's One Nation's Sarah Game, which is the MLC in South Australia. Is that how I correctly introduce your title?
Absolutely. Yep.
Now, do I call you MLC or Sarah?
Sarah's good for today.
All right, beautiful. So what are you working on at the moment? You said The Voice,
That's right.
mental health, and what was the
Yeah.
other big one for you?
Well, so many things. Yeah, The Voice has been taking up a huge amount of time. Obviously, that's still going, even though that's going to go through. We've been doing a lot of sort of, I guess, faith matters and family matters. So I'm doing something about parental alienation. I'm the only one in Parliament doing that as well. So looking at, I guess, the failure of the family court and the fact that, unfortunately, some parents do weaponise their children, against their former partner. And you can be a bad partner and still a really good parent. So I'm a really passionate believer about children being able to have both parents equally involved wherever possible.
Yeah, well, didn't that change in the last few years? Because I remember growing up, because I'm from a family that has divorce,
Yeah.
and it was that the court was so heavily always trying to push for that equal custody in a sense of being able to see both parents.
And I'm a child of divorce as well, and also my children are products of divorce as well. Although I will say I think I've done a really good job with my ex-husband, and we get on really well, and our kids are really, really happy, and it does show me what's possible. We talk happily about each other in our home, and our kids talk happily about their father and talk about me, in each other's home. And they call us whenever we want to. We go in and out of each other's houses, joint birthdays, all the rest. And I guess I do understand that those things are difficult at the time because it's been 5 years since I've been separated now. It does take a while to adjust, but it's disappointing that some people never seem to adjust to putting their children first. But yeah, it did change, and I think fathers' rights in particular did improve to some extent, but I think we've taken a bit of a backward step recently, and there's still a lot of it goes on. I mean, I know anecdotally just of people in my life where the children are still weaponized. So it can be as small as just, you go to drop your child off and the other parent won't acknowledge you. It signals to that child something's wrong, with that other parent. Or it can just be as simple as when that parent is, say, with one parent, the child doesn't feel they can talk about their other parent happily. But it can also be really extreme behaviour, like actually stopping visitation and things like that. So other countries do have legislation to at least acknowledge this parental alienating behaviours. And we don't have it here. So
how do you acknowledge it? What can you actually do about it?
Well, I think the first thing is to just make people aware that it's in the legislation, and if you engage in behaviours like this, which can be difficult to prove, but I think part of it is people knowing, well, it is legislated as a form of abuse, really. Lots of people want to acknowledge as a form of domestic violence. It's very scarring for the parent who's being alienated, and it's really scarring for the child as well to feel that level of stress. So I think there's a deterrent effect by actually legislating it so that people know, well, if you are shown to be behaving in that negative way, there'll be some kind of consequence. And there has been the odd case as well, to be fair, in family courts where a parent, maybe even the previous primary carer, has lost their children because they're shown not to foster a good relationship, with the other parent. I think you've got to ask questions when a child doesn't want to go with one parent. It goes so against the natural instinct, and some people say, okay, well, maybe they're not a good parent. Well, unfortunately, even when children are with not a good parent, they often still want to be with that parent. You do find that in abusive situations, the bond is so strong that unfortunately, as children, we still really tend to desire our parent. Not always, but
I mean, it makes sense, right? It's half our DNA. It's literally our idol of what it means to be masculine or feminine.
That's right. And so I just think when a child doesn't want to go with one parent, it is a little bit of an alarm bell. And I know, even with my own kids, so much of it is down to each other fostering a good relationship. I had my kids most of the time when we first separated, while my ex-husband was setting up. And my kids did find it a little bit difficult initially. And if I hadn't been saying, that's your dad, you have to go with them, with him,
Yeah, like encouraging
yeah,
it.
encouraging it. It's going to be great. And if he hadn't equally been saying, you can call mummy anytime you want to, things could have been different for us. But luckily, we navigated that. So.
And what did that take on like a personal level too? Because I mean, I don't know what your divorce was, but like, there's obviously a lot of emotion that comes with that process.
Yeah, there is. I think it was ultimately a really good thing for me. I mean, it wasn't my choice to separate at the time, but I think it was the right choice by him at the time, looking back on it. And I'm grateful for that, because one of the sort of sayings I wish I'd come across way earlier in life is there are only two experiences. There's those that you find immediately positive and those that you grow from. That's it.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
And so I guess, having the marriage breakdown when I had 3 children, 3, almost 2, and 2 weeks old, was definitely not one of those immediately positive experiences.
Yeah, I mean, you would have probably, I can imagine one feeling like, oh my God, I've been abandoned and I got to handle all this stuff.
So it fell into the other category of grow from this. And it was such a good growth opportunity for me. I'm such a better person. I'm a lot more resilient, a lot stronger, really grateful. I mean, I remember sitting with a friend of mine maybe 10 days after the separation, and she said to me, Sarah, like, you're doing so well. And obviously I wasn't doing well all the time. But I think the fact that I just thought, I'm not going to miss this opportunity to enjoy my children. I've got 3 beautiful, healthy children. I've got my own health. I'm really lucky. And I'm just not going to waste one more minute than I have to being down. And I'm also not going to rob my children of that, because I think as parents, we have to, it's hard to be happy as a child if your parent's not happy. And so we owe that to our kids to look after our own happiness and to be as positive as we can. And that's not to say I didn't have sad moments, but on the whole, I feel really, it's one of my proudest achievements, actually. Well, having my children, which are just the highlight of my life, really, and also navigating that period of my life, surviving that period, with my ex-husband, seeing that my children are happy. Because for me, the number one thing I wanted was a united family. So when it broke down, it went against everything that I could accept would ever happen.
I could imagine. I'm so family, like, it's the most important thing.
Family, same. So family is number one. So to feel that, especially as a child divorce, when my parents weren't so amicable, they were in the end, towards the end of my father's life, my parents did get on, but it was difficult growing up. And so for me, it was the number one thing. But I'm really glad that I realised I did have a bit of sort of counselling towards the end of the marriage, and that was really good for me. And the style of counselling was really good as well, because the lady that I saw said, we're not going to worry about him, because I think when you're in these relationships, you always want the other person. You're always focused on what they got to change.
As Kanye, let's play the blame.
Exactly.
Game.
And I was told for this whole time, for 3 months, it was, all we're going to do is focus on you and how you can be the best you can be. And that was so good for me, because although it didn't save things, it got me in the best position to deal with the end. And I realized that it didn't have to be so bad for my children if I focused on peace. Peace for me, peace for him, peace for them. I'm not claiming it's perfect all the time, but
I mean, it's life, right?
It's life, but we've done a really good job. But it could have been different. So I think I'm really passionate about that, because it links with family, importance with family, and it links with mental health, child mental health, and also parent mental health. I can only imagine the absolute strain of feeling that you're being alienated from your own child. And I should say as well that it's not just parents. This topic, what I'm interested in, is also other family members that get alienated. Grandparents, for example, that get alienated from their grandchildren. These things, have devastating consequences. And when I spoke about these alienating behaviours in Parliament, we ended up with hundreds and hundreds of people writing to us. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a misconception when I tried to talk to people in Parliament about it, where they said to me, Sarah, no, this doesn't happen. You know, there's not a significant problem. The people that complain about being alienated, they're abusive fathers.
That's bullshit.
They're abusive fathers who aren't happy with the family court system. And I said to them, but at least 50% of the people that have written to me for a start are female. And I've had a lot of grandparents write to me, and the friends I know who are male, I know them, and they're not abusive. And so I think there's this kind of misconception that somehow, certainly something I'm trying to work hard to change in Parliament, is this perception that it's just not as bad as it really is. And I think, unfortunately, it really is as bad as it really is. And we need to get proper education when people are separating, and a real understanding about the damage that it can cause your child, firstly, from just carrying out those behaviours, which can be small. I mean, even just things like maybe you don't want photos of the other parent up. I mean, what does that say to your child? Yeah. So that's a passion of mine.
Fair enough. There's something I want to go into, because I've seen that this has become such a widespread issue with, gender roles, there's transgender, there's all that. That's a segment of it.
Yeah.
But in like the midst of all this questioning, I think people have forgotten, and a lot of people want reinforcement about what is it about the nuclear family that manifests this powerful upbringing for people. So like from your perspective, like why is a family structure even important?
I know. I just think it's so important. Look, when I meet people, and they seem to have come from that nuclear family and that happy family, I just think, I don't know if they realise, because I guess you only know what you know. I just think it's the absolute biggest blessing that anyone can have in their life would be to have grow up in a home with a mother and father that love them. I think it just gives you such a sense of, I remember with my own children reading about resilience, for example, and I really want to try and create resilient children. And it was interesting to read, because I guess your first thought possibly is, teach them to like tough up and get on and, carry on and all that. And it was interesting when I read this book, and it said, if you want resilient children, provide this real love and stability at home and foster these connections with long-term friends and family, and give them those connections. I mean, that's what's going to give them that resilience. And I think that's just what a nuclear family does. It gives you so much resilience going forward, and it fosters such a positive sense of self-identity as well.
Is that because you have to deal with the resilience necessary to foster long-term relationships?
I think it's because, I think first of all it sets that great example about the resilience to foster long-term relationships, because let's face it.
I think it's huge.
It's
like, even
difficult.
growing up, like a lot of my closest friends in life are people that were family friends.
Yes.
Not all of them, but there's a significant number of my close circle is that.
Yeah.
So we've, gone years where we're not hanging out.
Yes.
And then we've come back together, and then, we've, as little kids, I hate you, I never want to see you again. Then the next weekend, hey,
Exactly. And it reminds me of, I don't actually read that much, but I feel like I'm referring to a lot of reading, but I remember reading about having long relationships with people. One of the biggest things you need is forgiveness. And I thought that's really interesting, because you sometimes think, well, if they're the good friend, I won't need to, be forgiving them. But actually we need that forgiveness if we're going to have a long relationship with anybody.
Definitely. And just, forgiveness in many ways, because people also want to change, right?
Yes.
And I think that in long-term relationships, that's one of the biggest graces to give your like close friend, is giving them the space to be able to recreate themselves and forgive their past actions, so that they can actually go into creating themselves differently, whether it be about a behavior. Because it's so easy, if you know someone for ages, to have that persistent listening of them as their past actions.
Oh, I feel so strongly about what you've just said. I think that's all through your life, and particularly, I mean, exactly, it's so easy even in school to feel that, oh, you're that way from something maybe that was even in primary school. And people need to be able to change and learn and evolve and let go. And because we're all professional mistake makers, quite frankly.
I mean, if you want to get anything done, you are.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to go for it. And I think feeling like you can have a fresh start and be who you want to be and learn, that's so important. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes when we don't feel that, we just end up cutting people off who don't let us adapt and change in the way that we feel we need to. So certainly. So it's resilience to have those relationships, but it's also resilience. I think life's difficult. Life's really difficult. And I wish kids were taught this more, because I think we've got a real mental health crisis with our young people. And sometimes I think it's just really good to know that life's really difficult. It's really difficult for most people. And I find that quite comforting, because then when you go through a really difficult phase, you're realizing you're not alone. I mean, life is difficult. But I think if you come from a nuclear family, it just gives you so much strength to deal with life's difficulties.
Yeah. I mean, and just on that little micro level, you get to see how someone deals with their morning routine.
Yes.
Say, mum's stressed in the morning. Okay, how as a little kid, just looking like, oh, how are they dealing with that?
Yes.
Or even dad, like, oh, he's singing in the shower. Okay.
Exactly.
Like, it's okay to self-express like that.
Exactly. And it's exactly, and I think, I mean, it's really sweet the other day in the car, my kids, had a little argument, and one of my daughters was being unpleasant, to my son. And I thought, oh no, here we go. And then they got out and they're standing on the porch, and my youngest daughter, she's only 4, and she said to my son, I'm sorry, I'm tired. I get grumpy when I'm tired, which is something I've explained to them to understand their feelings. And my son said, that's okay. We all get grumpy when we get tired. And I think it's good for kids to learn, like, these are normal things. And when we get tired, we get sad or we get grumpy. And I really, for me, going back to the single parent thing, I mean, anyone who's a parent knows it's a blessing, but also a lifetime of guilt and feeling like you could do better, which I struggle with as well. But I really make a big point of trying to teach my kids, we always love each other. It doesn't matter. It goes through ups and downs. Sometimes we do get annoyed with each other. Sometimes I'm tired. Sometimes things don't go well. But we always love each other. And I think that's something that kids sometimes just need to be told and learned. Nothing will break that.
That's so powerful. Like, everybody needs to hear that.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Like, that is so touching.
Yeah.
And also, what a sage moment from your son.
Yeah.
Like, shout out to you. That's pretty cool.
I know.
Like,
He's only 8, bless
yeah.
him, and he forgave her instantly and said we all feel that way sometimes. And another saying I hear my kids say is they're sort of like, oh, every family fights or argues, because I don't want my kids to think, it's okay. You've had an argument. It's all right. Every family does that, and we love each other and we move on. And so, yeah, it's good to see how close they are. I mean, I was the only child, and I had a really lonely upbringing. So it gives me a lot of joy to see that they're really never alone, and they're so close.
Yeah, that's huge. That's definitely huge. Okay, so to get into the education system, because what it looks like in terms of just the macro condition is that we're moving towards more dependence on the state.
Yeah.
Because everybody needs to work, right? Because
Yeah.
back in the day, it was only you could have a single man's income and provide for your whole family and your kids and have a nice house. That's no longer the case. Even if you're in a nuclear family, like, both parents, unless they're in like a high earning industry, need to work.
Yes.
So now kids have to go to school for extended periods of time, and parents don't have enough energy and space to teach them as much as they used to be able to.
Yes.
So what are the kinds of things that you've heard of being taught, and why are those things not okay to be taught?
Yeah, I think you touched on a really good point, though, and I think it's really sad, because we don't have enough time to really foster those family units anymore the way we used to, because people are under a lot of pressure. So, yeah, firstly, acknowledge that. Look, well, my kids are sort of new to the school system. Their reception year 1 and year 2, I had them amazingly close together, and I guess I'm a bit of a tough love person, so I like the old rigorous way of learning to read and write and repetition. I'm happy with my children's school. It is a good school, but it seems to me that uh, it's a little less rigorous than it used to be, and I think that's a shame. I think there's a place for that kind of really rigorous learning.
Like, are we talking slapping people's fingers with a ruler?
No.
Rigorous, or like, what are we talking?
I just think there's a place for, and probably my kids are maybe a bit young for it, but I think, I taught, because I taught for a while as well. I don't know if you know that, but I taught older children. So it's a bit of a tangent now, but I was a vet, obviously, mostly, but I went and taught year 11 and 12 equivalent students in the United Kingdom. And I loved it. I mean, I didn't like school, so I was really interested to see how much I loved going back into a teaching environment. It was a highlight of my life dealing with these young people. And it was great because we had a lot of fun and a lot of banter, and I really enjoyed that aspect. But I was also really strict. I mean, there were times when I just don't want anyone to talk, because I want you to listen, or I want us to do this quietly or this way. And I pushed them. And I remember when we had the first parent-teacher night, I thought, oh my goodness, this is so embarrassing. Everyone's going to hate me. I'm going to hear this, oh, we hate her. She's awful. And the first girl came, first feedback ever. I remember her, Amy, and she's like, you are my favourite teacher. And I thought, what? Because kids like learning ultimately. I think that's the thing. Kids shouldn't be in charge. We're in charge. We're the adults. Kids like learning. So I think when you do what it takes to make it a learning environment, and when you really care for those kids, even if you're strict, even if you're firm, even if you're not always nice, ultimately my experience of teaching was kids really respect that and they really like that. I mean, the other thing they did there at the school I taught at, which again I was really negative about initially, which I think you are when you feel that you're being monitored, was they asked all the students very regularly a number of questions about their teacher. And I thought, oh, come on, they can just do what they're told. I don't want to hear what they, think of me. And I was worried. And it was amazing to see this extremely positive feedback about me. And I just say that because my motivation was never to be liked. And therefore I was worried, because I wasn't always nice. And
Why do you think it is that they develop that respect?
I think it really comes down to that fact that kids can tell when you really care. And, I really cared deeply about all the kids in my class, and care doesn't always come with giving people what they want. And my kids actually, one of the best moments of my life ever was getting a letter from the principal at this college. So it was a huge college. There was about 3,000 students, and we had about 13 biology classes. So I taught biology there to sort of year 12 classes. And there was lots and lots of teachers, and I had about 5 classes, and I taught there for 3 years. And he just wrote to me to say, Sarah, in every class that you've taught over the last 3 years, the students have done better than they've ever done before. I was the highest performing teacher there academically.
And how hard were you on these kids? Like, what does that mean to you in being a hard teacher? Because I was variety of that.
Yeah, exactly. I was pretty hard, but I would say the biggest. I was pretty hard in the sense that I expected them to do what I said and what I asked and the homework. But the real way of getting that to happen, and the reason. So when I got this beautiful letter which said, the kids would never have done this well if they'd been taught by anyone else, and I've still got that. It's just was such a highlight of my whole life. And they said, "What are you doing? Like, what are you doing?" And teach others. And in the letter, it listed some things that they thought I might be doing. Must be doing lots of marking and lots of monitoring and lots of this and that. But what really happened was the kids in my class they worked harder. They did it themselves. So they went for it. So I guess what I did was somehow inspire them to believe anything's possible. And I really believe that with education. So one thing that really annoys me is when we put limitations on kids, and this links back to what you said about giving people a fresh start. We kind of go, oh, well, you're not really good at that, and you're not really that bright, and your thing's really kind of this. And I really hate that. So when I got these kids, this was in the United Kingdom, they came with predicted grades, said, oh, look, this kid's going to get a C and this kid's going to get a this, based on how they'd gone, say, in year 10 or whatever.
That's wild. Did it have any conditions? Like, and they'd been going through this in their personal life as well?
No.
Oh, come on now.
And
That's
it's so silly. And I would just say, right, let's ignore that. Like, we go for the top, like with every kid. And I think that just creates, it's just taking away that limitation. And I think that's just, so it was hard, but I was enthusiastic and naturally positive and cared. So that was really a simple, I'd love to say I was so talented with all my teaching skills and the way I presented everything, but I was just learning that. I don't think I was any better than anyone else at that. It was really, the skill was inspiring the kids to really go for it themselves. And I guess then being available to them always. So I'm not saying teachers have to do this, but I personally always said I'm available every lunchtime, and I sat in the staff room, and I loved it when kids came in and, bent over backwards to help kids when they wanted to learn and scaffold, because I'd been there myself. So I think I said to you, like, I'd been there myself where I'd done so badly at school. So badly. I mean, when I was in year 10, I went to 5 high schools.
5?
Yeah.
Why so many?
Well, we moved around, and, we had private schools and then changed and, went to state schools, and, I came to Adelaide briefly, and then I went back to Sydney, and then, it was just a really tumultuous time, and my parents separated, and I just got to that point where I'd kind of given up, and my parents, certainly my mother, used to tell people, I wouldn't finish school. It just wasn't going very well, and I remember being in the hallway once. I think it must have been raining outside, and we were sitting inside for lunch, and a teacher, and I wish I could find him, but he changed my life. My maths teacher, Mr. Weathered, came up to me and said, Sarah, what do you want to do when you finish school? And this is year 10. I don't know. I came up with a few ideas, and he said, okay, because at the moment you've got no options. And it was such a good moment. And I guess this is what I think about the tough love. Don't just, when you really love people, you tell them the truth, when you really want the right thing for them. And so I, in that moment, decided I'm really going to turn my life around, which, can I say, was really hard. For anyone else who might be, thinking this, I went home and I decided I was going to work really hard, and, I hadn't always done that badly, and I was going to change things. And then you come back and you do the test and you fail, and you're still not doing well. And you've got to just keep pushing through that. It wasn't easy. And that was a shock, because you start trying and then you're still failing. But then ultimately, I think I said, I got 99.7 and I could have done anything. But I always ended up coming out of that thinking to myself, oh my goodness, if I did that, anyone can do that, because the difference was hard work. And so I guess that's the gift I gave my kids, was I knew, I've been where you are or worse. And the difference here is hard work. And if you can do that, you can get there.
I totally agree. I've been discovering, because I'm 27 now, and I've been discovering over the last 7 years a lot, is like, when you put the work in, there's only one outcome.
Yeah.
It's like going to the gym. There's one outcome that happens with consistently going to the gym. You're going to get stronger. You're going to get bigger. You're going to get more energy. And you're going to get more confident. These things just happen. Now, does that mean it's going to take 1 week? No.
Yeah.
But if you keep at it, you will get. There's only one result.
And this is what we need to teach kids, because I feel at the moment we're in a really low resilience, sort of instant gratification society and culture.
Heavy.
Yeah, and I think that's no good for mental health. So when people talk to me about children and young people with mental health, I talk about how about be grateful for us firstly. So when we learn to be grateful, that helps us be happy.
Yes.
And let's talk about resilience and the fact that life's difficult, because there is a place for talking and asking about what's wrong, but at some point you've got to say, I mean, another book I read by Gordon Livingston, who was a psychiatrist and, fought in the Vietnam War, and he lost a couple of children, one by suicide and one to cancer, and he wrote this book about, how to be happy. And I thought, oh, great, if he's worked out how to be happy, then that's saying something, from the trauma that he'd been through. And he said when he would see people as a psychiatrist, he would have this screensaver, on the computer in the back, and be listening and listening, just hoping that they might notice the screensaver. And on the screensaver, it just said, what's next? Because at the end, it always comes down to what's next, when something's happened.
Yeah, as as Marshall famously put it, we need the circuit breaker.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's true. You need a circuit breaker in life to stop it.
Yes.
And go, you know what? I'm changing my actions, and even if that's a little step, like
Exactly.
you're depressed. All right, and we were talking about this. We did a boys podcast, and we were saying that essentially, like a lot of the depression in society, and one of my friends was saying all the depression, but I think it's a lot of the depression in society is because people haven't been able to create the foundation of healthy habits that manufacture happiness. Going for a walk, doing exercise every day, eating the correct amount and eating nutrient food, sleeping enough and being hydrated enough. Like those basics, like I don't know, how many people are actually doing that?
I think that's a really good point. I think we need to be taught, I don't think I learned about self-care until way later in life either. And I think that's something we need to be teaching kids, because you say, oh, look after yourself or self-care, but I think kids really need to be taught that. Like, what does self-care really look like, and why is that important? And acknowledge that self-care takes time. Yeah. So it takes time. It takes time every day. So every day you need to be putting an effort into looking after yourself so that you can deal with what life is going to throw you. But I do think there's also that mental outlook aspect. I think we've moved too much into, what's wrong and, why are people feeling sad, and it's okay to feel sad. And, when I speak to these experts sometimes about what is really being taught in schools about mental health, because everywhere I've been, it's like, we've got a mental health program, we've got a mental health officer, we've got a mental health hub, there's all this mental health money. Everyone's really proud of everything they're doing for mental health. But you think, young people are getting more depressed and anxious than ever, and yet we've got all this mental health stuff going on. And so I think it's gone sort of too negative.
Yeah, but they're killing themselves.
Yeah.
We have an epidemic of people killing themselves. Like
we do.
That's fucked.
We do. We do. Well, as you know, last time we tried to do this podcast, my father died by suicide that day. And so I think, and that was, and I, it's different for everyone. And I wouldn't say, to be honest, that I'm coping well all the time, but something that's helped me is on that, because I think with mental health, we do talk a lot about mental health, but I don't think we talk enough in detail about mental health and how people are feeling. And I think we do need more personal journeys and stories. And so I can only just say that for me, acknowledging that something had happened that would never, ever be okay was really helpful, because it meant that I didn't have to try and get over it or just deal with it or anything. It's just like
you gave yourself room to grieve.
Well, I did, and I also realised I'll be grieving my whole life. So I better work out a way about how to carry this, because this forever for me will be something that happened that wasn't okay. But in a way that I know it sounds a bit dark, but it was really helpful, because I thought, okay, so you're going to have to put this somewhere sometimes, because it's always going to be with you, and then you can visit it. And that's helped me to know I can visit it when I need to, but at the same time, I don't need to get over it. I don't need to just get to this place with it or anything, because it's always going to be there. And so it's just a lifelong thing to carry. But the second aspect of it was realizing that pretty much everyone, if you live long enough, carries something that's not okay with them. And, that is life. So you're not alone with that. Lots of people are carrying things that will never be okay. And we need to learn to deal with those things. And I think for me,
how do you deal with it?
Gratefulness. So being grateful, and it's not always easy. I think that comes back to looking after yourself. So your ability to be grateful, I think, does depend on being somewhat in a balanced state.
Because just to touch on your father passing.
Yeah.
Like, we're supposed to have this podcast, and then the next night I see you coming on Sky News.
I know.
And I was just like how have you put yourself together that you can go 24 hours later and go, you know what?
Yeah.
I have a mission that I'm actually pursuing and I need to perform.
Yeah.
So what was that 24 hours?
Well, exactly. Well, my dad, he was so against The Voice, which we haven't talked about much. But unfortunately, dad died, and literally the next day we were kicking off with all The Voice stuff. And so I don't want to miss it. And I knew, my dad, he used to comment on my Facebook page and get more likes than I did, So so everyone was like, yeah, that's it, Robert. You hit the nail on the head. I'm like, go away, Dad. Stealing my limelight. And he was really passionate about improving the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, but as I am, but he was also really against The Voice. So for me, and he loves Sky News, and so for me, it was really important to do all The Voice stuff that I could, and to get that message out there, because actually I feel really strongly about that. If we'll talk about The Voice for a minute, because it just, like, the more I've looked into it, the more upset I am about it. I mean, literally most people, all they know is it's called The Voice. And because we're good people, I think we're good people and we want the best for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. As a busy working person, you just hear The Voice and you think, great, I want them to have a voice. And you move on, and that's about as much detail as you have. You think, what can that hurt? We want a voice that'll help them. Anything we can do. I think society, we know there's a problem with an overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in lots of statistical areas that aren't good, high suicide rates, lots of children being removed from families, domestic violence, alcohol abuse, poor health, diabetes. We know this, unemployment. And so people want the best. So they hear something like The Voice, and people know the history, and they feel bad, and they just want to help. So I think when you look at the yes votes, it really comes down to compassion, and the name The Voice evokes that compassion. But what people need to realise is The Voice is just the name. It's the name of a piece of legislation. And to really decide if you're into that piece of legislation, you need to know a little bit about what it's about. Although I would say, and I think if people knew what it was about, they wouldn't be happy. For me, I looked into the detail, but I quickly realised that it was just the concept that was wrong as well. I read a really fantastic book. I don't know if you've read Burden of Culture. This is the best book I've ever read, by Gary Johns. And it's called The Burden of Culture, Dismantling the Aboriginal Industry. And I think Gary Johns is absolutely passionate about improving the welfare of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. And he was completely against The Voice and the rest of the Aboriginal industry. And reading that book, as well as going out in the community, I realised we really need to move to a system based on needs, not based on race. And people say, well, don't you think, there's been a disadvantage because of this and that and this history? I'm sure there has been. We have to acknowledge that lots of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are survivors. They've overcome their history and they're doing really well. There's still an overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders not doing well. There's lots of people who are not Indigenous not doing well. In fact, the vast majority of people in South Australia, 75, 76%, who are in poverty or homeless or at risk of being homeless, are not
75%.
Are not Indigenous. The vast majority are not Indigenous. That's not to say that from that small Indigenous population, we've not got an overrepresentation, but it's needs-based support that is the fairest way to help everybody.
Fair enough. And I want you to get into that a little bit more, but let me just clarify that bit you just said.
Yeah.
You said 75% of people are on the verge of it, or 75% of the people that are on the verge of it are
exactly.
not
75%, yeah. So
25% of people on the verge of homelessness and such and actual poverty, 25% of that is Indigenous and 75% is other cultures.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So of the group that are in poverty, 25% are Indigenous, 75% are not. And people say, well, that's a huge portion of Indigenous.
Yeah, I mean, given that they're 3.8% of the population,
it is
obviously huge.
It is, but it doesn't negate the fact that most people who are in those struggling positions are not Indigenous. So when we say, well, we're going to do this for this group but not for this group, you're actually missing out the biggest group of people.
Yeah.
And when you say that 1 in 4 of us are immigrants or have come as refugees, often with trauma histories or, having been persecuted or difficult environments in their home country, I think we're going down a slippery slope. I mean, many of those immigrants come here, they work hard, they create good lives, and they contribute. We've all got a trauma history, and people can work their way out of poverty. And I think there's a level of scaffolding that's needed, but I think we're in a dangerous situation when we say we're going to treat this race that's had this difficulty like this, and we'll treat everybody else like that. I think the best way for a united Australia going forward is to say those in our society, no matter what their race, who are struggling, we look after you based on need. And that avoids all the stuff we've had with Kaya Ma recently about is he not Aboriginal. If we're scaffolding people based on need rather than on race, we're going to avoid that real race focus.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a read of the South Australian legislation that got passed around this.
Yeah.
And it's, it's pretty wishy-washy.
It's so wishy-washy. Look, Hamish, I couldn't even believe, they said, oh, we're going to have 40. I mean, I think then they said 35, but there was numbers thrown around. We're going to have 40 elected members to make this local based voice or First Nations voice. I thought, okay. But then I read the legislation. There's no number in there. And I thought, okay, but there is no number stipulated here for the 40 that was going to make up the local First Nations voice. Then they said, oh, we're going to have 10 or so state First Nations voice. But then there's no number in there as to how many they're going to have.
There's no lines drawn.
There's no lines drawn. And the scariest thing, and I think this is really, really interesting to say as well, was from the draft version to the advanced version of the bill, they put in this little extra about the ability to make committees. Now, these committees all have to be manned by people separate to this 40 or 50 or however many other elected members we've got. So there's already at least 4 committees established, but sort of for me the most worrying part was the ability to create new committees, which seemed to be the only thing they needed to do was the state-based voice of the 10 or 12 or however many just needed to go and approach really the Attorney General, Kaya Ma, and say, look, we want to establish this committee, and as long as between them they agree, we could have another committee. So we end up with this local First Nations voice, the state First Nations voice, at least 4 committees, and the ability to establish other committees. So I ended up, I mean, anyone who's been following it would know that I've been really the lone voice against the voice for so long, and at the last minute, really, the Liberal Party came in and said they were also against the voice too. But ironically, when we were in the Parliament, I put up this amendment and I made it really clear I'm against this First Nations voice bill, but since it will pass with their numbers anyway, I wanted to give Parliament really a chance to put an amendment through that would limit these extra committees being made. And the Liberal Party did not support that. So that was kind of interesting. I felt that was a bit of a backflip.
Why? Why did they say why they didn't support that?
Well, they did. I think I would have gotten a very different response pending who had the voice at that time to say why. But when they said why in the upper house, it's because apparently went against their feeling that they wanted whatever voice it was going to be to have as much autonomy as it could, which for me didn't make any sense when you're actually saying you're against the voice.
But then you don't want to actually make sure. Isn't that their job? Isn't it the job of the upper house to say, all right, let's draw some lines? Did they draw some lines?
We didn't draw any lines. We drew no lines.
Did anybody draw lines?
There's no lines drawn.
Well, that's ridiculous, isn't it? Yeah, because from what I was reading, it was like, one, it's the whole defining what is Indigenous is not clear whatsoever. It's essentially mutual agreement in communities.
Yes.
And then also, if there's any information that they do not want to disclose for whatever reason, as long as they agree to that as a group, they don't have to say anything.
Exactly.
And then with the ability to make all these committees, it kind of sounds like it's a big bureaucracy and a great way to just have free jobs off the government. And while, there's one side of that argument, they go, oh, well, it's good that they have jobs. Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's like we don't need a big, burdenous bureaucracy of, whatever the reason, the rationale, the cause, whatever. We don't need a big bureaucracy. You need things done by the government, not jobs given out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just would say as well, I mean, when we had the draft bill, I found it really astonishing that this voice that we were going to pay for virtually didn't. I have adapted it a little bit, but clearly at some time they thought it was appropriate that they didn't really have anything to do. Like they didn't have to make an annual report. It said things like, oh, they could make an annual report.
Yeah, they had the option to.
But they don't have to make an annual report. And I had a question in Parliament on that, and Kym said, you just wait and see the advance bill, because he had changed that. So there will be an annual report now, but they didn't change attending Parliament. So it still says that this voice might be requested to attend Parliament, but they don't have to. The voice might be asked to make a parliamentary report, but they don't have to.
What is with just this is like a whole thing going on in our country, right? Is we have this referendum that's about to happen.
Yeah.
But then it gets rushed in on the state level.
Yes.
Like what? Like how that doesn't line up.
I just think it's as simple as ego. I know that sounds really I honestly think the Labor government here has been really egotistical with this.
Just to put a number on the board of saying we've done something.
We want to be first. We're going to be first. And sometimes when people say to me, why don't you want them to have a voice? What's the harm? What's the harm of it? So that's the other statement that really annoys me, because it's like, well, we're going to spend a lot of money and time on it. We've already spent quite a lot of time on it, and it's like, what's the harm? And actually, I even heard, the Premier and Kym, and on the ABC Breakfast saying, oh, look, no matter how you feel about it, it's not going to cause harm. Well, I totally disagree with that. Firstly, I think we don't spend taxpayer money like this when so many people are struggling on establishing something so massive just to say, well, look, at least it won't cause harm. I mean, but we're paying for that as taxpayers, so that I've got a problem with that. But secondly, I think it does cause harm, because we could just be getting on with this now. I mean, we know that we've got a problem with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders attending school, for example, very low attendance rates. We could just be getting on with that now. If they don't go to school and they don't get an education, they're not going to get employment. They're not going to be able to thrive and contribute. We need to be dealing with that now. We already know that the first few years of life of children is really important. We need early intervention to keep families together and families safe. We know we've got problems with domestic violence, particularly in some of our Aboriginal communities. We could be putting money into services now. And it shouldn't really matter what race you are. I mean, why would you go into a particular community that might be predominantly Aboriginal and some, maybe a small percentage are not Aboriginal? You're going to sift through to work out what support you're going to give to who. I mean, it's a struggling community. They all get that support.
Yeah, well, definitely. And I also heard like an interesting question about it was, okay, if you let's say you're married to an Aboriginal man and you've had Aboriginal children, does that mean that your voice, you can't contribute, even if you could be the best person to contribute?
Exactly.
Because you're living in that and you're working in that and all that, But that's the whole thing. It's
divisive.
And I think the big thing overlooked, and this is something I learned from John Carty, who's the head of humanities at the South Australian Museum, and he really opened my eyes up to this, and I'd love to have another conversation given everything going on, but is that the Indigenous are not a homogenous people.
Yeah.
There is like over 300 tribes of Indigenous communities across Australia that have completely different politics, completely different ways of life, completely different languages.
Yes.
And it's like looking at Europe and saying, yeah, let's have a voice for Europe, and expecting them to even be able to get in a room together and actually agree on anything.
I think it's not going to happen. We've got so many elected voices now. The idea that we're going to end up with sort of one, I think ultimately one person is going to come in and be that voice into Parliament and represent everybody. I think that's made things really difficult.
That's on the federal level, though, isn't it?
That's on the state level. So
there's only one person.
So they have all the people.
Yeah.
But only one comes into Parliament to explain how everybody feels.
Oh my!
Do you think that's going to happen?
No, like we can't do that now with any of the Westminster system as it is.
So that's the plan, and I do, yeah, exactly. That is a good argument, but I think ultimately for me, it's just the whole concept of division and treating people differently based on race. I think we just need to treat people based on need, and the more I've thought about it, the more obvious it is, and I don't know why we're so resistant to that or why that would be viewed negatively. We help those based in need. A lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders aren't in need. You know, they aren't in need. They've worked their way out. They have lives to be proud of, and they're not in need. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So we focus on those in need.
So I guess the natural follow-up question to that is, okay, well, what do we do? What do we do about these issues?
Yeah.
Given that, okay, if we don't do the voice,
yeah,
how do we address this huge and probably growing issue given the economic times we're going into?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things, and I'm not saying I've got all the answers, but a couple of things we can do are, and probably I might go with the hardest, most tricky one to explain first, and that I do think mindset is really important because it was really hard for me, for example, when I went to some disadvantaged schools that had very high populations of Indigenous children, 35, 40%. And you had these teachers there who were working their guts out. They were trying their absolute best. And they said to me, Sarah, you know, it's really hard. These kids, they say to us, I'm not doing what you said. You stole me. And I just think part of it is mindset because teaching people and them and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders having good mentors to show them, like, we can do this. You know, we can do this. Hope, mindset, we can do this, having positive mentors around because, you know, it can be.
But how do we create that? Because obviously there is generations of dysfunction, if you will. And
there is, but I also think as society we need to stop saying sorry all the time because, you know, we need to stop. I mean, that doesn't mean that everything was okay. It just means that we need to stop creating a situation where we start everything with, you know, we're really, really sorry. It's really, really hard. It's really bad. We've put you in a really bad situation. We owe you. We should help you. We should do this because...
Well, you don't move forward when you keep saying sorry, right? Because you're still focusing on the past.
You don't. And the thing is, and I know that it's a traumatic history and I'm not diminishing that. It's out of care, again, that I really feel that way to say, you can do this. You know, others have done it before you. You can do this. You can get out of this, you know, but... Every one of us has to ultimately have personal responsibility. I mean, I know it's different, but my father is the oldest of 8 children and grew up in absolute poverty and very difficult home life. Wonderful mother, but violent father, and you know, left school at 15. And I think, yeah, I've just always been taught at the end of the day, you have to get on. And so I think there's a little bit mindset. You know, if you go into victim mindset, it's hard to work your way out. And I think they should, you know, they're survivors of their history. And, you know, I have huge admiration for the many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that have worked their way out of that to become hugely successful. But for others, keeping alive that mindset of, you know, that you can do this is part of it. But in addition to that, it's tangible solutions. I mean, I was really surprised. We've got an attendance problem across the board, really, but particularly with our Indigenous youth. And we aren't really putting very much resourcing into dealing with that, for example. So teachers are left ringing up, chasing students, going to students' homes. They're left feeling unsafe, you know, going in pairs to try and collect kids. And I do feel that we need to have better resourcing with that. And
But what can you do about that? You know, like what is better resourcing around that? Because that's just a hard issue to deal with. Like,
it is. Well, I think one of the things resourcing that does though is allow teachers to focus on the kids that do turn up, because I think that's a bit of a slippery slope when you hear that there's schools that are having 35, 40%, non-attendance rate.
that's huge.
That is, and they're left trying to deal with, this obligation of mandated reporting and trying to do their best for these kids. It's a distraction for them when they're already overworked. I mean, I have a lot of respect for teachers working in schools that are dealing with kids in socio-disadvantaged situations. It's really, really, I think it's so difficult, and I think a lot of people would be surprised to see just how these kids are living and not so far away from us either.
Yeah, and you were speaking into that victim mindset thing, and I don't think that's an Indigenous issue alone by any means.
No.
I think that's a Western world issue.
Yes.
That is like a zeitgeist of our time, because we're focused on identity so much.
Yeah.
And when you focus on identity, well, you're finding out, oh, this is why I'm a victim for this and that and that, and
Yes.
that's whole, stacking that on top of each other and thinking about yourself all the time.
Yes. Oh, it's definitely not. It's definitely not. And I'm not saying, I mean, look, I will say that I've been out in the community trying to meet, particularly in the lead up to The Voice. I wanted to know how the, Aboriginal community was feeling about it here. And I absolutely loved the Aboriginal people that came out to meet me. I mean, they were just fantastic and, so open-minded, and they just wanted to be included and do well. I mean, the ones that I met, and they couldn't have cared too about The Voice at all. I mean, they were interested in The Voice if that was the answer, but otherwise they didn't care about The Voice, and they certainly didn't care about Welcome to Country. They just cared about, they wanted better lives, and they had actually good ideas. That's what I found interesting. So for their own communities that were struggling, they had good ideas already.
Why is none of that? Because obviously there is a lot of programs and stuff like that in the system already.
Yeah.
Like, why are those kind of things just not being done? Why is nobody talking on like this local level and doing that?
Yeah.
Like, shouldn't that be able to already be done?
Absolutely. So when I went out to Point Pearce, I think it was, they'd already spoken to the government. I mean, it wasn't the first politician to go out there. They'd spoken to them a number of times about all the same issues that they spoke to me about. And so I think you're right. Why were we not already coming up with ideas now to deal with those issues? But actually, I was really impressed with their own insight. They had their own ideas that were good ideas.
Can you rattle me off like one?
Yeah, one
example?
idea that came to me was, I mean, they had they said it's really difficult to get the police out, for example. The police didn't like coming out, and I think quite a few cars would come out, and they had a problem with I think some of the youth going around and destroying the homes, and there was also a bit of an unemployment problem. And they said, well, why not have some of us, who are respected in the community, paid to be kind of the officers around
So
here.
they can mediate.
Yeah, so we can mediate it, and they've got those connections and those relationships. And I just thought that's just a really good idea. I mean, it just seemed like a really good idea because it deals a little bit with, touches a little bit on the unemployment and purpose, and avoid if they're finding it hard to get the police out anyway. And I just thought they just seem to have a number of good ideas already.
Well, I guess the follow-up to that in a more calloused point of view would be, well, why can't they just go join the police force as it is and go do that?
Yeah. And I think I'd love them to be able to go and do anything that they wanted to do. I guess it's also about being maybe a little bit flexible about dealing with needs now and what the skill set is that's needed, and understanding that if they've already respected in their community and they've got that skill set, then maybe we need to be a little bit adaptive here and provide a different role for them, but still a paid role.
Yeah, fair enough.
They seem to me largely to want to do well. But I also came across that mindset of, well, maybe we should be paid, a certain rate by these people to just basically be here, or this kind of mindset. And I just don't think
Just paid for nothing kind of mindset.
yeah, and I don't think that's healthy, because I think we all need purpose, and purpose and contributing are good things.
What is it in the education system that is being taught around gender and stuff like that? And like, can you just spell the ABCs of why it's not really why it's not a cool thing
Yeah.
to have?
I know. Well, I hear a lot as well, this kind of argument. Oh, you won't confuse kids. You're not going to confuse kids, which I find really interesting, because as adults we seem to be confused a lot, about lots of different things, and certainly lots of adults get confused about gender later on, or you certainly see adults coming out later and feeling, that they suddenly feel confused. So I always find it really interesting.
Like middle-aged men, half life crisis stuff.
Exactly. So I find it really interesting when people argue, well, you're not going to confuse a child. And I think, oh, that makes no sense. And so I think for me, certainly, firstly, all children should be loved, and included. And, that's important, no matter what. But for me, and certainly our party, any ethical and moral issue, that's the role of the parent, and not the role of the school. So taking this new role on, I did find it really interesting, for example, to see in the Year 7 curriculum, and I know these things are touched on earlier actually at different schools, but certainly by Year 7 standard in the curriculum, there was these activities to consider and think about. And really I felt questioned, what gender are you? How do you feel in your mind versus your heart versus maybe how you are biologically? And I do think that's a dangerous thing. And I also think that parents have a right to teach their children and to raise their children the way they want to, with regards to morals and ethics. And I think personally, I don't want my children questioning the way they were made.
Yeah, like basic biology.
Yeah, exactly. And my young son came home one day and said, and it wasn't a teacher, it was just at school, so I think this is everywhere, and he said, "Mummy, did you know boys can become girls?" And I said, like, "Who's told you that?" And he's like, "Oh, there's this girl in his class. She told me, she knows this and this can happen." And I think that's very confusing. I certainly saw my son looking at me thinking this was like a mind-blowing thing. And yeah, so I just told him, "No, darling, that, you're a boy. You're a beautiful boy, and you're always going to be a boy."
Yeah, well, it's a new phenomenon, isn't it? Right? Because like you go look at Thailand and some of the Southeast Asian countries,
Yeah.
and being a ladyboy is something that has been regular in their culture.
Yeah.
So acting like a girl isn't necessarily new, but however, actually transitioning
Yes.
is only available because of modern medicine. It's not something that has
Yes.
historically been something that's available.
And it's too often this sort of affirmation-only approach. A lot of people, as we said earlier, young people are really struggling with their mental health and well-being. And I think it's really become a bit dangerous, really, because suddenly if you're feeling depressed and you're feeling down and not fitting in, suddenly it almost feels like it's about gender, and maybe you're the wrong gender.
Yeah.
And
then you get rewarded in social currency for
yes,
coming out as something in the LGBTQ plus community.
that's right. And I found, I went around to lots of different high schools, and I would ask, this would be one of the questions I'd ask, not the only question. I mean, actually the main issues at the schools I went to were attendance and child protection issues, but this certainly came up, and most high schools I went to agreed that there was a bit of a pandemic with children having this kind of sex confusion. But when they told me that these children often change their name as well. So I remember one principal telling me, a child had changed their gender, or at least decided to dress differently, but were also going to be called now toxic fungus. I thought, wow, this is really...
That's pretty funny.
I thought,
That's such a troll.
I thought, okay, this is clearly a mental health issue, not a gender issue. Like, this person needs help. You know, this person doesn't need to be allowed to come as in a dress, you know, now or whatever. This person needs help.
Yeah, like little kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess as an adult, it's like, well, as long as you're, supporting yourself, do whatever you want. That's
Yeah.
freedom, right?
Yeah.
Act however you want, as long as it doesn't infringe on anybody else.
Yes.
But I feel like the issues with kids is you want to create a prosperous society,
Yes.
and the way to do that, you have to draw lines in the sand.
Let kids be kids. Why? I mean, I don't understand why we're teaching them things like who do you want to be intimate with and think about that when they're not even in an age where they're allowed to be
How
intimate.
old are kids when they're being introduced to these ideas by the actual
Well,
curriculum in any form?
yeah, well, I know. I mean, for me, certainly I think it's younger in some schools, but year 7 for me is too early to be asking, whom, you feel attracted to here and who you biologically might feel attracted to. And, it's you're not going to be intimate with anyone, one would hope.
Yeah, because I remember having sex ed when I was in year 6
Yeah.
and 7.
Yeah.
And, there was some funny questions. I remember this one kid, he's like, oh, and he said it in front of the whole class. It was classic. He goes, is it weird that, like, when mummy and daddy were watching, like, a movie and there's like, a sex scene, like, I'll get hard? And the whole class erupted with laughter. It was hilarious. I don't know where I was going with that, but it's just a funny story.
See, I think that's it depends where you go, because I remember getting our sex education. The most I ever remember was that, and I actually think it was a good thing. Maybe I'm a bit old fashioned, but we got sort of a cartoon, and then they sort of, went under the cover, and the love heart came out, and honestly, that's about all I remember up until year 7 or 8.
Yeah, but we are in a more sexualized culture, right? Like,
We are.
everything's more sexualized. So I guess in the defense of the school system,
Yeah.
they go, well, the kids are asking about this stuff already. They've got TikTok, they've got YouTube, and there's
Yeah.
been experiments on YouTube where they've shown, like, they've gone undercover and acted as a kid on
Yeah.
YouTube, on your profile and all that, and just the amount of gender and sexualized things just coming on the feed and being promoted to them
Yes.
is just exorbitant. So it's like, if that's just the types of topic they're already
Yeah.
consuming, I can understand how the education system does want to address that, because, well, it's like, what are they going to do if they don't?
I would say, though, I guess I'm really against kids, younger kids being exposed to social media or having the ability to search on phones for those reasons. Because, I mean, I've been to schools where Christian faith schools actually, and had, principals tell me they've got children as young as 10 addicted to pornography, that they found, on their
that's
phones.
just terrible.
It's so harmful. So I guess my response is a little bit, keep them away from social media as much as possible. But you are right. There is a role for learning these things, I think, later on in high school. But for me, certainly primary school, and even early high school, parents really ultimately should be in charge of those issues and how they want to teach them. And even if that's making sure that parents are notified that certain aspects are going to be taught in the curriculum, because particularly when it comes to gender and sex confusion and gender fluidity, I don't think that's got a place in our schools, and certainly not in our primary schools or early high schools. I mean, I remember getting a book from the library accidentally once for my own kids. I didn't realise it was about a transgender bear, until I started reading it. And luckily my kids can't read, so I sort of adapted the story and got away with it. But for me, I think that's confusing to be reading those types of stories to young children.
I mean, it's just topics that they don't need to know, especially with your children that are so young.
That's right.
Like, they don't even need to explore those topics yet.
And this book was clearly made for really early primary school age children, and I find that hard to understand why. I guess people say to me, well, what if there is a child sitting there feeling they're in the wrong body? And I just think, well, teaching children kindness, love and acceptance is all we need to be teaching when it comes to those matters for primary school age children. And I think that if you're a child in a loving and kind environment, and you are battling some kind of confusion, then you can at least go and talk to somebody about it. But as far as teaching all children that they can be this bear or that bear or so on, I think that's going too far.
Yeah, well, I mean, considering it is a very small percentage of the population that even has this as a, as lived experience.
Yes.
But that's actually not a bad idea. What you were saying before about having more transparency from parents, of what their kids are actually being taught. Because
Exactly.
we live in the digital age. Like most of the curriculums would be on the computers anyway.
Exactly.
So to have some kind of hub where they can access what the kids are being taught would, even for homework and stuff, would actually be useful.
Completely. And I think they do that for some things, but I think particularly with these sort of moral and ethical issues, parents have a right to say, that's not for me. And certainly, I would
then
agree.
It would go, okay, if you had 20% of the class was saying, yeah, that's fine for my kids, and then 80% or vice versa, how do you go about, dividing those kids up? Would you say, over 50% of the parents have said no?
Yeah.
Or the ones that have voted, and have more direct democracy?
Well, for me, it just shouldn't be in the school. I guess that would be my answer to that one. But I guess if you're gonna as a principal say no, we're gonna have this here, then at least give parents a chance to opt out. But for me,
it's just do an overhaul and just remove all this kind of stuff.
I really think so. I think all kids let kids be kids. Teach them love, kindness, build friendships, support, look after mental well-being.
Yeah, well, I mean, what do we do about the phones, right?
Yeah.
What do we do about kids having access to the internet and, becoming porn addicts at the age of 10? Like I hadn't heard that. That's ridiculous.
It is. And I feel lucky that, I didn't grow up in that age. The phones is a difficult one because, we're obviously bringing in a phone ban, or Labor are bringing in a phone ban into high schools.
Okay, are they?
Yeah.
So like in school hours, like do you have it in lunch at recess or?
I think it's in school hours. I think it's, they handed in, the idea is, I don't know if it's being fully rolled out now, but I think the idea will be, in school hours. But whether that's then overreach about control, some parents want their child to be able to have a phone, and be able to contact them, in the day if they're not happy. So
isn't that such an interesting transition that we went through like thousands of years of like, you know what, my kid had to just go explore the world without me.
Yes.
During the day when I was going and doing stuff. But now it's like helicopter parent central. It's like, I want to see your GPS location. The world is dangerous. The world is dangerous. Is the world really that dangerous? Like, no. There is danger in the world, obviously, and there are some horrendous examples. But here in Australia, is it really that dangerous?
Look, I would say, and it's embarrassing, but if I'd only had one kid, I might have been a helicopter parent. But I think the biggest blessing for my children was having 3 kids in 3 years. Completely stops that. I mean,
you take care of you and you take care of you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember especially separating suddenly as well and having 3 kids, 3 and under on my own. And I remember my youngest daughter, when she was a really little baby and she'd be crying and I'm trying to get ready to go out or get dressed or pack the bag and, give them a good life. I never wanted my kids to miss out on anything because I was a separated mum. I think that was really important to me. I wanted to make sure my son, particularly who was the oldest, that he still got to do everything, that we went out, that we went to the beach, that we went to that outdoor pool, even if it was me on my own with 3 small children with all their floaties and all their stuff. And with that came a bit of a harshness where I would say to my older 2, go and look after your sister, make her laugh or read her a story, just with the picture book. And it was a good thing, they learnt to look after each other. They learnt to fall over and move on. I mean, I am caring. You always give as much love as you can, but I think
the science has come out about that is pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's like you can never overlove
this is a good thing. Try telling my kids. My kids might feel overloved. They're like, no more kisses. They ration them out, and but yeah, I absolutely smother my kids, and I think you can't give enough love. But I think,
you probably give too much control.
Yes,
but you can't give enough love because love and control are different.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
They are different. To say, oh, you can't do this. It's because I love you. Yes. It's very different to. You are a blessing in my life.
Absolutely.
And I love you.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Well, I tell my kids that all the time. You're the biggest blessing of my life. And I love it, when they look back at me and go, Yes, Mummy, you tell us that every day.
It's like, well, why can't I?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay. So overhaul of just the education system, make sure the curriculum is, a bit more in line with what
Well, we've
the
got kids, sorry to
general humans
interrupt
are.
there, but I should make the point that when we've got so many kids that can't read and write properly.
But that being said, we're moving into the fourth industrial revolution where reading and writing is, it's becoming more useless. Now, reading may not be,
Yeah.
but definitely writing. You have AIs where you can just type in the question and get the whole essay. So there definitely needs to be movement in the education system.
There does.
Like it's a 200-year-old system based off the Industrial Revolution to create workers.
We need major overhaul of what's being taught, and I think making it more relevant for people and young people about what they're actually going to do. I think there's still a role in learning how to spell and write and how to do basic maths. But I agree with you that we still need to be moving forward and thinking about what skills do young people really need. Because young people aren't motivated to learn about things they don't really need.
Essays are a thing of the past now.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, it's ridiculous. And this is just what's publicly available. Like, think about all the private systems that, your BlackRock are using,
Yeah.
Have you heard of Aladdin?
No, I haven't been on them. I've heard.
No,
I've heard of them.
So get this. Aladdin is supposedly the one that BlackRock uses. And it's this forecasting trading tool that is an AI tool that just has so much information plugged into it.
Yeah.
And it forecasts the stock market. And it forecasts industries. And it's supposedly like an absolute juggernaut. It's not publicly available. It's not like ChatGPT and stuff like that. Because they're just what's available, right? When you have companies that have invested privately billions and billions and billions, like they have their own bill.
It's exciting times. It's going to change everything.
Yeah, 100%. And that, obviously, the education system needs to move tact. And on a basic level, we know there's, 8 different types of learning, and we're not addressing that.
Yeah. Completely. It's true. And I think discovering your style of learning is so important to, learning to thrive and be successful.
It's obviously a big job.
It's a big
It's
job.
a huge job. It's like the biggest job. It's the most important job, the future of our country. It's the future of our people.
It is.
I mean, you get Finland and stuff like that have started treating teachers as professionals and giving them professional salaries. So then it attracts like actual people that, instead of them going to be a lawyer, they go and be an educator.
That's right. I mean, because there's such a variety in standard, I'd say, in teaching. And I would love to see actually teachers rewarded financially based on the impact that they're making, not just the academic impact, but the engagement impact, the behavioural impact that they're making. So I probably don't support necessarily just standardised pay rises, but I certainly support those teachers that are high performing being paid really well.
Yeah, fair enough. And I guess there's a lot of levers that you can pull to make sure that happens, making it a higher ATAR, making it so, you change that. I mean, you couldn't really change it historically because just the qualifications would have to change to create a new future, right? And that's probably going to start in the private sector having, private schools actually make the march on that. And they do in many respects. Because I know that I was at school and I asked teachers, how much do you get paid? And they told me, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
They were like, look, if I do some after school activities and stuff like that, I can get about 110,000.
Yes.
I was like, that's pretty cool. And that was when I was, I don't know, year 8 or something. So shout out to the school I went to. They're paying the people well.
Yeah.
So let's just move away. You traveled to Africa, I believe.
Middle East.
The Middle East?
Yeah.
And is that where you did the black rhinoceros work?
No. Well, so I did the veterinary degree, right? So I grew up in New South Wales in Sydney. So I'm not from Adelaide.
Okay.
My dad was always from Adelaide. And so that was always the pull to come back here. But I did my veterinary degree, University of Sydney, and I had this passion always, and probably what I should have said at the start of this podcast is, if anyone's even, managed to listen this long, is I guess I was always driven by having a meaningful life. I mean, that's the truth. I just wanted to have a meaningful life. And it's why I did veterinary science. It's why I went and taught in socio-disadvantaged schools. It's why I decided in my veterinary degree that I was going to save the endangered African animals, starting with the black rhinoceros. And so...
Yeah, you are, girl.
So I decided... Yes, the idealism of youth. Although apparently I'm still an idealist, which... can I say, I got told for the first time when I entered politics, and I met up with an ex-politician who was in his 90s, and he'd asked to meet me, and we were talking, and he said, "You know what your problem is?" I thought, okay, what is it? He said, and he was so gorgeous, like I just loved him. But he's like, "Your problem is you're an idealist, you know?" And no one had ever said that to me. And after he said it, I started to realize that this has probably plagued me a lot of my life.
It's
But
like a striving for utopia that never comes.
yeah, and I probably had assumed the naivety going into politics knocks the naivety out of you, really. But yeah, I've been blessed with having an idealistic approach to life. And so I wanted to really save endangered animals, and I decided to take a year before finishing my veterinary degree to do a year of research at the uni and study the black rhinoceros, because at that time they were trying to breed these rhinos at the Dubbo Western Plains Zoo, and they were all dying of this hemochromatosis. So
What's that?
iron storage disease, which, can I tell you, so it's quite rare in the rhino apart from when they're in captivity. But humans can get iron storage disease too. And I actually later in life had a blood test, and I actually am predisposed to this hemochromatosis as well, which I just find so bizarre that I went to study rhinos having hemochromatosis and ended up that I've got the human version.
Wow.
So that was kind of unusual. So no, I did that at the uni with the view to thinking that I was going to become at minimum a kind of zoological vet, or even better, end up being in Africa saving all sorts of animals. But in reality, you know, I worked for a year in a country practice in New South Wales, and then decided to go to the UK, met my husband, and worked in small animal practice. So it never happened, but I've always had a love of travel. And so I lived overseas for 12 years. I lived for a year in Germany. I lived for about 6 months in Paris, and I just traveled a lot.
How'd you find Paris?
Amazing.
Yeah, I've been, and I found the place amazing. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
But I did find that the people were quite rude. I don't know if I'm just a bastard.
No. Well, I thought that, look, I love architecture. So Paris it's gorgeous. So I just, everywhere you walked, it was amazing and beautiful. I just never got tired of Paris. But I do remember one of the first times going to Paris and trying to get some water. And I don't know. I mean, I couldn't speak French. So I know they knew I wanted some water from this bar. And it was like, you're not having it. You know, if you can dare come here and just say water like that, you can dehydrate to death as far as we're concerned.
So callous, is it? Oh. Yeah, no, I learned a few. I learned, est-ce que vous parlez anglais?
Yeah.
I was like, please, speak English. Yeah, it was funny. George and I, we went to this patisserie in the morning. We had this like 7 a.m. routine that we created. And it was go to this patisserie, get some nice food from there, go get a coffee from this other place. The first day we get the coffee, we sit out here, and the lady's like, "What are you doing? You're not allowed to do this." And we go, "Oh, sorry, do you mind if we buy the coffee off you?" And then we eat this thing from the patisserie literally around the corner. So it's like they're neighbours.
Yes.
And we eat it here. And she's like, okay, that's fine. As long as you buy the coffee from me, that's cool.
Yes.
And it's very broken English, of course. Like, anyway, so we do this for about 5-7 days.
Yeah.
And on the last day, the lady comes out and she just has the biggest fit at us.
Right.
For doing this again.
Yeah.
And there was no like, hey, this arrangement's not on anymore. It's just fucking, you're done.
Yeah,
and
finished.
Just yelling at us. Like, yeah, it was wild.
And I felt like one memory that comes back, I mean, it was such a positive time, and I went so many times, but at one point I got this little apartment that I rented for a few months, and I was really surprised about the fire sort of safety there, because it was like this rabbit warren, you know, up on like the 3rd or 4th floor, right down the end of like a one-way hallway, and there was your room, and there was just no way out. Like if that thing had gone up, there was just no way out. And I remember it had this kind of little split loft scenario where you slept. There was a little window that looked out into the hallway, and I think it was like the first or second night I was there sleeping in this little loft, and I thought, this is so cool, you know, I've got this place in Paris, it's amazing. And in the middle of the night, these 2 men just started yelling and screaming and jumping up and banging on the window that led into the hallway. And so I opened it. Oh, is that?
I think that's your phone. Do you want to go grab it?
Do you want me to? I thought I put it on silent, Hamish. Do you want me to put it on silent?
Yeah.
All
If you need to grab it, you can grab it
Oh,
now.
no, I don't need to grab it.
Oh,
Should we let it ring out?
Oh, well, I mean, it's only got a few more rings.
Yeah, let's go.
Just a little background music.
Little background. It's authentic. And yeah, it was his French policeman. Because there'd been like a robber or someone like up on the roof.
Lupin.
And so they just wanted to know I was okay. But I guess, yeah, it was an interesting start. Let's put it that way.
Freaking out.
I was gonna get killed. Exactly. It's so full on. But no, I love Paris. I'm glad I saw it before Notre Dame, burnt down.
Right.
Yeah.
Same. Very happy about that.
Yeah.
I forgot that happened. That's terrible.
It is. And that was such a beautiful
building.
Beautiful building. But I went all over, and I think I just, I loved exploring. I guess that's, something that I would say. I just loved adventure, and I loved exploring, and I loved authentic travel. And
what's authentic travel to you?
Well, probably one of the most authentic travel experiences I had was going through the Middle East. And I'm not sure that I would advocate it for everyone because it was a little bit hairy. But I arrived, I had a few friends. We were white and pale as anything. One of us was sort of a 6'7" albino beanpole type guy. And then I went with another very rotund individual. And we just stood out, I guess is my point. We absolutely stood out. And we were completely unprepared, and we flew into some place in Egypt, and we got all local travel, local buses, local everything. And I realized people just don't travel that way in the Middle East. A big tourist bus would come, and all the tourists went on that, and then we would get on the sort of local bus, and we were the only ones. And you'd be, traveling through the desert or wherever. I mean, one of the hairy experiences would have been when I went to Jordan, and actually had a couple of hairy experiences in Jordan, although I loved it. I mean, swam in the Black Sea, went to Petra. It was just stunning, really on the whole, friendly people, hospitable experience, actually. It was great. But we were in the night, it was in the night, traveling for hours with this taxi driver, and we were going around this windy sort of section, and there was no seat belts. And I was saying, it's okay, you just drive slower, we'll pay you more, because I thought he's probably under pressure, you got to get the money, And he just said, you got a problem, you want to get out? It was like in the middle of the night, nothing around. It's like, no problem, no problem. But these things make your experience later. So, that was one. But I guess also, I think sometimes the hairy experiences, I associate them with authentic travel. I mean, I remember getting on a ferry from Jordan back to Egypt, and we got off, and there was all these unmarked vans that came over, and they wanted the business, to take you wherever you're going to go. And it was sort of like a fight broke out. Luckily, I'd met a really lovely man from Bahrain on the ferry, and he came over and, I think spoke Arabic and, sort of
calmed everybody down.
Calmed everyone down. They
all want your business, and they're fighting between who's going to get it.
That's right. We even had a guy come over, I think from the military, it was that bad. And in the end, it was all negotiated, in a language we couldn't understand. And off we went in this white van with these
sketchy,
with these two men for about 6 hours through a desert. It felt a little bit sketchy, but
when are we going to die?
But we arrived safely, so I wouldn't necessarily advocate for it. But it was really authentic. It was authentic travel, and we met some fantastic people. It wasn't all hairy experiences. I mean, we just met the best people as well. And
I mean, look, that experience, while it sounds like it was a bit dramatic, there's worse. There's definitely worse. You
and it could have been so much worse.
Oh, well, people get their organs ripped out and stuff.
Yes. So we were lucky. So
we were lucky.
It's a trip I look back on with fondness, but at the time maybe I thought, just let me live. But no, it wasn't quite that bad. But
fair. I had that in New York, actually. I thought I was going to get killed because I was talking to this like equivalent of a bikey gangster fella, and then the owner of this underground club that was an illegal club. And I was talking to them for a while. It was like my 21st. I was drunk.
Yeah.
And then they start talking about all these dangerous things they've done. And when I say dangerous things, they're talking about how they've stabbed people and like proper like gangster talk. And I'm there just going, like freaking out in my head, like, oh my God, they're trying to inadvertently say that they want to kill me. So then I go, hey guys, is this a conversation that I should be a part of? And they go, if you want to go, go.
Yeah.
And then I go over to George. I'm like, George, you're gonna kill us. We need to leave right now. And he's like, what do you mean they want to kill us? They're gonna kill us. We need to leave. And then we go to leave, and then the bouncer's just like, oh, we're not allowed to leave right now because there's cops coming past. And it's a legal club, so you're gonna have to wait here for a bit. So then I'm thinking, oh my God, they're really gonna kill us. Anyway, we got out. We didn't die, and I was freaking out.
Well, New York's a fantastic city.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
I mean, I love it. I think, I love New York. It's such a 24-hour, 24/7 city.
In summer. In winter,
Yeah.
no. But in summer, definitely.
Right, I must have gone in summer.
Yeah,
so-
I started there the end of summer, and I saw the transition.
Oh, did you?
I did. It was cool.
Yeah.
And it got cold.
Right.
Cold.
Okay. I was lucky.
People were still out, but like nowhere near
That
streets were empty.
20, really?
People were in places more so. But
Yes.
there were still things closed and all that, but it's different beast when it's cold because it's like negative, like 20 degrees when you have all the wind chill.
Well, I just loved America. I mean, I went through America for about 6 weeks, and it was just the friendliest place. The experiences that I had on the whole.
Same.
I mean, I know that, of course, you've got to be careful. I remember being in San Francisco, and you can take a wrong turn there, definitely, and find yourself in trouble. But Americans, I found, just love Australians.
Oh, yeah. We got great social currency overseas.
They just love it. And, well, for me, it was a massive fall from grace because it was my first time really going on a big trip. I'd been to parts of Asia, when I was younger, but when I was about 24, that's when I left for 12 years. I remember waving my mum and my grandmother off from the airport. I said, I'll see you in a year. And anyway, 12 years later, it took me to come home. But I started in the United States. And I spent 6 weeks there, and I thought, wow, I did not know I was this amazing, because everywhere I went, they loved Australians. I was like, I just felt so fantastic about myself. But then I went to the UK.
And it faded.
I went to the UK, and I'm like, hi, I'm Australian. And they're like, oh my gosh.
Like, cool.
Like, why are you telling me that? And you've just gone right down. But I just... Because 6 weeks of being in America, and I felt like Americans were so helpful. Like I just had to stand on the street with a map that I was about to look at, and I'd be like, "Hey, can we help you with that?" And I thought, "Wow, this is like I'm blessed. I'm blessed. I felt really important and really welcome.
You're like Dorothy with the red shoes.
It was a fantastic. I really loved America. And then yes, it took a while to warm into the UK, where I ultimately lived for a really long time, and I did love it and had great friends and a beautiful place, but. Certainly, not so good for the ego.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, I think one last thing I want to ask you about, because I think it's part of the cultural narrative that people are trying to understand.
Yeah.
What does it mean in terms of like gender roles?
Yeah.
To be a man, and what does it mean to be a woman? And what should people be like striving towards inside of that gender role?
That's
your opinion of your life, not what everybody necessarily should do, but like, what does that actually look like to you?
Well, I would say for me, I mean, we are born as we are, so I guess that's my first thing. So I think we are born female or male. I mean, that's how I feel about it. I do think there's scope within that. I mean, as a female, it's easier for me to talk about it probably as a female, but I think we bring that empathy and nurture to relationships, but so do men. I mean, men also can be very empathetic and nurturing as well. It's different. I think it's okay. I think it's okay to be different. I think this idea that we all have to be exactly the same and capable of all the same things all the time. I think it's okay to say that we've got naturally different strengths. That's a tricky one. But for me, talking personally as a female, I'd say my strengths anyway are probably, empathy and nurture. And, I'd say that's it.
Being empathetic and nurturing. I mean, look, that does sound like you're embracing the divine feminine, because when you think about the divine feminine, the divine masculine, it's like the masculine is the provider of things.
Yes.
And it's like, like if you use a home, for example,
yes.
the man will get the home, And he'll go,
Yes.
I worked all these hours and I worked these years to get this home. And then the woman comes in and goes, let me make it a home.
Yes.
You know, let me make this an actual wonderful space where everybody wants to hang out. The friends come over. They're like, oh, it smells good. It
Yes.
feels good.
Yes.
Like most men don't bring that. Obviously, there are, you know, the architects and there's people that, you know, full channel their creative vibes in
Yes.
that. But that does tend to be like a divine feminine ability is to make a space just so wonderful to be in.
Yeah, I mean, look, exactly. I think that is true. I mean, I certainly know men in my life who are very good at bringing that. But I think, yeah, I think I think it's okay to let men and women be different and to have those roles if they choose. I mean, a lot of people are happy, you know, with a bit more of a clear understanding of who did what. And I think that's one of the reasons relationships break down now is because people don't know who's responsible for what anymore.
Fair. Yeah, well, there's an interesting study that came out. I believe it was JP Morgan that said by, it was either 2030 or 2050.
Yeah.
I get confused because everything's 2030 these days. And it's essentially that women ages between like 22 and 50, 22 and 50, by then, 52% of them will not have long-term relationships and not have kids.
Oh my goodness.
That's the trajectory. So that's why I think it's such an important thing
Yeah.
to, especially with people, you know, that are doing it. You have children, but you're also a successful person, but you're also going out and affecting your community. So what does it actually mean to you?
Yes.
Because, you know, everybody's kind of just going with the cultural zeitgeist of how they think. And I think this is the real, like, thing going on that leads to things like, you know, everybody getting confused about their genders and their sexual orientations and all that, because it's like we're not embracing our divine feminine and our divine masculine. And as a man, I need to embrace my divine feminine in my own way.
Yes.
For sure. And that is also, you know, it's not just one or the other. It's we have both.
You have both.
But as a man and as a woman, like it is channeled. Like we're born as a man. You're born as a woman.
That's
so
right.
obviously like that's like, you know.
We're different.
Yeah, well that's just your predominant, you know, you got hormone systems and all that works
Exactly.
around that to curate that experience.
That's right. No, it's exactly, it's biology. But I do just think with that in terms of, I just think, again, teaching people to focus on actually just getting on and trying to live a meaningful life and contribute, you know, would be a really positive thing. I think we're happier when we feel that we've found some kind of meaning or purpose.
Fair. And okay, what do you think in a relationship that a woman should bring? Because we live in a culture that's Instagram and all that's like, oh, I just bring my looks.
Yeah.
And then you give me everything.
I think that's exactly. I'm discovering this as I've now got older. That this I think has really grown, and I think it's such a shame, can I say, for women, because women have so much to offer, and this kind of real obsession with how we look now, I think, is a really big problem. It takes up time, it takes up resources. In fact, some young people, men and women, but certainly it is a problem with women, and we're talking about women right now. I think spending the majority of their time, energy, and resources on that takes from them away from them developing all the rest of who they are.
But what are the rest of that?
Well,
What
I
could
can
that
only,
look
well,
like?
yeah, for me, I think it's like a softness, you know, like a nurture and a care, you know, to your partner. I think that's what a lot of men need from their partner. If I'm honest, I'm not saying that's it, I'm being the expert, but you know, I think that women, and I think women need it from men as well, you know, in a different way. But I think for your partner, providing, you know, life is difficult and it's hard going out into the world all the time, and you've got to have a lot of resilience. And I think that's probably harder for men, for example, still, you know, there's an expectation of how to be. So I think for men particularly, it's important when you come home to your partner to feel that, that it's a soft, kind, loving, tactile place.
So not bring the drama.
Exactly.
Essentially,
Exactly.
don't be dramatic.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Oh, just thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. You're
Yeah.
an awesome woman.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for caring about the community and, you know, taking action. Appreciate it.
Well, I would just say I don't feel, even though I've worked extremely hard since getting this job in terms of hours, I mean, I feel so blessed to have this job. It's a huge privilege, and I don't really feel like I've worked a minute since I started. I enjoy it that much and appreciate it that much.
That's awesome. And where can people find you online?
Well, I've got Facebook, Sarah Game MLC. I've got Instagram and I've got Twitter.
Yep.
So hopefully expanding soon.
Excellent. All right. You've been listening to Watch Your Voyage. Thank you for listening. And please like, subscribe, leave a review if you like this. It makes a difference with all the algorithms and all that. And just share it with your friends because this is a knowledge sharing exercise. And I hope you enjoyed it. Peace.